What's going on, guys? It's your Javi David St. Clair Speaks, and you are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speaks Show.
You are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speak Show.
Welcome back to the St. Clair Speaks Show podcast. I'm your host, Javi St. Clair, sitting with another incredible guest. I'm super excited about this one. Very timely, I would say. I'm sitting down with Brenden, aka the founder of MasterTalk. He coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become the top 1% in communication in their industries. He's also a popular YouTuber. He has a great YouTube channel called MasterTalk with the goal of providing free access to communication for tools for everyone across the world. I've actually had the pleasure, and I just told Brenden this right before we started recording. I've heard him speak on Clubhouse numerous times. So he's definitely the guy for Master Talk. So super excited to have you on the show. Brenden, please welcome to the St. Clair Speak Show podcast. Give our listeners a 3 to 5 minutes. Well, damn, I can't talk. I need Master Talk right now. Give our listeners a 3 to 5 minute introduction on yourself, your brand, your business, and what brings you onto the show.
First of all, Javi, thanks so much for having me, man. It's great to be here, and I'm glad you caught me in the 3 minutes of fame that I had on Clubhouse. Obviously, now today that platform's worthless, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you caught me in my three to 4 minutes there. So yeah, man. So my name's Brenden. I'm the founder of MasterTalk. It's a YouTube channel I started to help the world master the art of communication. But how it started was when I was in college, university. I went to business school, Javi, and I started doing these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing tennis or rugby or baseball or basketball or some other sport that the kids would play, I wasn't one of those guys. I did presentations competitively, and that's how I learned how to speak. But then as I got older, I had the idea for Master Talk because I was coaching a lot of the students for free in that competition program so they could do well. But I realized that everything I was coaching them wasn't available for free online on the internet. So I said, shouldn't somebody like make YouTube videos on this to like help people who can't afford a coach? And I realized nobody was really doing it, especially in my age range. So I started making YouTube videos in my mom's basement. Then a few years later, I got lucky with a couple of things. Like I was early on Clubhouse. I caught a couple of waves, and here we are today.
Okay. Super excited for this. Okay. There's times where I gotta remind myself I don't need to be at a 10 all the time. But let's dive back into the backstory, right? Who were you before you invented Master Talk? And was this something that you seen yourself doing further on down the line?
Never. Great question. That was never the plan at all, actually. So when I was in university, Yahavi, my goal was to be anything but an entrepreneur. You know, the typical entrepreneur is a DNF student. They're selling lemonade stands out of their locker room when they're like 11 years old, like Gary Vee. I'm the anti-entrepreneur. I was a straight A student. Right when I was in high school and college, I did really well in academics. My thought process is very simple. Why be an entrepreneur when I have a guaranteed six-figure job waiting for me out of university? It made no sense to me. So I thought entrepreneurship was for losers, frankly. So Master Talk was an accident for me, brother. It never was planned or anything. The goal was to be an accountant. That's what I studied in my degree, surprisingly enough. I worked at one of the big four accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers, that I used to think was a water bottling company. It's how lost I was back then. And then I went on to work at IBM for many years before I did this full time. So yeah, that was never the initial goal. But what happened was in university, one of the ways to get one of those coveted jobs was to do case competitions. So when I was 19 years old and I had this big suit on because I didn't have any money and my parents were factory workers, so I had this big suit from prom and I had a tie that, let's just say, didn't stop at my belt. And I would talk to a lot of these interns at these big companies who were 2, 3 years older than me. And I said, so, like, how did you get a job? Is it grades? Because I have good grades. And they said, no, it's not grades, buddy. You got to do case competitions. And I said, what is that? They said, oh, it's this thing where you compete against other students and business executives watch you and they kind of talent scout you into their companies. I said, nobody told me about this. And then I started doing that, Yahavi, and that is where I accidentally learned how to coach people and how to speak, which later turned into Master Talk.
Okay. This is going to be really good. Okay. So I never really talk about the last interview I did, but I literally just interviewed Grant Baldwin, founder of the Speakers Lab,
Of course.
literally yesterday. So to have you guys as back-to-back interviews, this is something I'm really excited about. So I want to talk to you about the art of communication because we live in a time where you could communicate in so many different ways. And I think one of the questions I had for Grant yesterday was the transition of storytelling for professional speakers, with the entire world shutting down. You mentioned something earlier on as soon as we started recording that you caught the early wave of Clubhouse and the push for social audio, and you took advantage of that communication. So I want to ask you, what are you seeing right now in this industry of quote unquote speaking and communication? Because this is communication, right? And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm like, man, this guy's a really good speaker, right? So like you automatically took me to that portal where I envision you doing TED Talks. So can you talk about the importance of polishing your communication skills?
100%, brother, and definitely a big fan of Grant. Love his work, and I also bought a couple of his programs. Good guy. But the thing I want to drive here, Yahavi, it always goes back to the baseline, which is what's our long-term goal. That's how we start every conversation with this question. How would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? A lot of us, when we think of communication, it usually stems in negativity, stress, anxiety. Oh my God, I don't want to do this. Whereas my perspective is like, okay, how would your life be better? Because communication is so much more than presentations at work or speaking on the stage. It's the way that we talk to our families. It's the way that we talk to our loved ones. It's the way that we travel, where we go meet strangers when we travel or order food at a restaurant. It's every moment of our life. It's all about leading a fulfilling life. So, given that, for everyone listening to this podcast, that answer will be different for them. For some people like me, it's I want to build a big personal brand. I want to impact billions of people in communication. And it's probably something similar in your case, being a podcast host. But for somebody else, it might just be a better mother. So it's all about optimizing against what is that end goal? What is our dream that we have in our life? Whether it's to be the best dad in the world, to be a great communicator, and to tie in those personal goals with communication. So now with that said, what does that lead us into the future? I would say when I think about the industry now, for me, since my goal is really to build a personal brand that stands the test of time, that's really my goal in my industry. I always need to use communication as a leverage, but I shouldn't get romanticized over the tool. So Clubhouse was the tool for like what 90 days and then it wasn't. But I can't get tied into which one is the right one, but rather what's working in the moment. I would say right now what's working in the moment for me is three things. One is a daily organic LinkedIn strategy because organic reach on LinkedIn is super good and gets me a lot of clients. The second one is definitely YouTube. YouTube is like at the end of the day, that's what creates the most successful brands. At the end of the day, if you got 10,000, you got 100,000 on YouTube, doesn't matter who you are, people will respect you. They go like, "Oh wow, this person's really established." They don't really say that if you have 10,000 followers on Instagram. They don't really care. A lot of people don't. And the third one is of course what we're doing right now, which is podcast guesting. If you're interviewing on other people's shows, what's nice, even if the audience is small or even the audience is big, it's not that important, is that that episode lives forever throughout the history of how long that show is. And that's really the long game of podcast guessing.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up podcasting because that's exactly where I want to go. There are some people, and I got to say this on the record because facts are facts. There are some people that just interview much better. Like they're just better guests. Like you are a phenomenal guest. But I mean, you're Brenden from MasterTalk, right? But
You're so funny, man.
it's true though. But can you talk? Can you kind of like touch on that? Because I get a lot of business professionals that come on the show, and there are just some people that interview much better. They know how to communicate. So can you touch on that?
100%. I'm happy to give you my tactics. It's super simple. Life is a sport, Yahavi, right? We can't do everything and be world class at everything. And the same way you'll never see me try to become an NBA player or a sports athlete. Yeah, sure. I'll play the beauty leads at the YMCA. Sure. I might have fun kind of making fun of 15-year-olds and beating them in basketball. I honestly, they'd still beat me. But when it comes to this medium, like media, social media, podcast guesting, this is something I take extremely seriously. Like I've guested on so many shows and I want to be the best in my industry. So I put a lot of my focus on this. But there's actually a couple of strategies you can do to be really good as a podcast guest. But they're so simple that no one does it. That's why people like me or like yourself or people a small group of people really stand out. So let's go through those things. The first one is what I call question drills. So question drills are simply an exercise, Yahavi, where every day for 5 minutes, you write down a question that you think someone will ask you about your expertise and you come up with an answer. But if you do that once a day for a year, or in my case, hundreds and hundreds of times, like on Clubhouse and the hours, I mean, you know how many hours I spent on that bloody thing, right? Eventually, you have an answer for everything. So when you have an answer for everything, no one's asking me my favorite color. But they're asking me topics around communication, my expertise. So eventually, you get so good at answering the same question over and over and over again that you become unstoppable. So that's the first thing. Do question drills more often. Most podcast guests don't take it seriously enough, and that's why it's hard for them to stand out. That's number one. Number two is understanding what the definition of value actually means. Chris Doe from the future explains this so well. He says, value is simply tell me something I don't already know. And the best way to figure out what your audience doesn't know, because if you say things the audience doesn't know, they'll listen, they go, oh, this person has something unique to share. So everything I'm sharing right now as I'm talking to you, I'm in my mind prioritizing the information that I'm pretty certain no one has ever shared on this episode, or at least in the way I'm packaged. But that's an exercise I've done before I even stepped on the stage, where I essentially make a list of all of the ideas, all of the insights that I have, like how would your life change if you're an exceptional community? That's a question I invented. So nobody else is going to share that on a podcast. But the other piece, which is number three, and this is the work that nobody else is willing to do. That's why people like Gary Vee and people in that industry really stand out, is if you want to know if your ideas are unique, you need to put in the time to listen to other people in your industry, to listen to a shit ton of other podcasts. I listen to 90 minutes a day, Yahavi. 90 minutes a day. I'm listening to other people's podcasts. But because I do that every day, I know all the ideas that are being shared. So I can check off the box to make sure that all of the ideas that I ever share in a podcast are 100% unique. So I stand up for another guest you've ever had on your show.
We're just gonna let that one breathe for a little bit. That was really good. That was really good. And I just want to add too, I'm not gonna lie, I'm really biased. Like I am really biased with certain guests. I don't care about the accolades, but if you interview great, that's the sound bite I'm gonna push on social media. And I'm noticing this too. And you mentioned that you listen to podcast shows. I was listening to this podcast the other day. I think it was Bigger Pockets. There was a guest on, but I automatically stopped what I was doing because my phone was in my pocket. I'm like, yo, who is this talking right now? Because he was pulling me in. He was storytelling, tonality, enthusiasm, energy. I'm like, yo, who is this dude? I gotta follow this guy. I gotta get his book. But it's like that. You have that. There's just some people that talk to you, and there are some people that talk to your spirit. There's a difference. There's levels. So I could see how you excelled in social audio. So I want to ask. I want to ask you this: is that why some business professionals aren't showing up on video, or how can they improve on video?
Absolutely, man. I think for me, it's all about leveraging your strengths, but also going into the mindset. So for me, I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. I'm actually not good at building businesses. That's not my thing. I'm very good at media. I'm very good at posting on social, and that's what drives business. So I have a business partner who takes care of all my back end that you never see, you never hear about, but he's the real operator of my business. So it's also about understanding what you're good at. And the other piece is mindset. So my mindset whenever I'm on a show, and which is very different than most, which is I want to be the best podcast guest in my industry. If Yahavi has other communication coaches on his show, he needs to say without a hint of doubt that Brenden is the number one coach that he's ever interviewed. That's really my mindset. Whether it's with podcasting, whether it's my YouTube channel, I really want this to be the best YouTube channel on communication. Same thing with my LinkedIn content. But because you have that as a goal, it won't necessarily always happen. But because that's my goal, it elevates my standards. So I don't just stop at average. I go, okay, no. I need to be super empathetic. every word, every sentence, every syllable that comes out of my mouth, is there a better way to recommunicate that? So, for example, whenever somebody asks me, what's your biggest tip? How do you get over the mindset? I would go into this 20-minute useless story around, oh, this is the academia around public speaking for blah, blah, blah. But the average person doesn't get that because they don't know much about communication. So, it's about simplifying my ideas so much that it really hits people. And you could only do that through trial and error. And I would say somebody like Gary Vee takes this to the extreme because he's someone like at VCon, like the event he had, he is rumored to have taken 5,000 selfies with the people that's maddening. Like if you think of the energy that requires, most human beings just can't bat at that level. And what I love is that he has that energy because he knows what he's good at. Which brings us to the last piece, which is your question around, is that why business owners aren't leveraging video? I definitely think it's a big fear piece, but I also think it's about realizing what you're good at. So here's what I would say. I would start the video conversation not by posting on social media, but rather by giving you the easiest possible exercise that makes you feel that you can be impactful on video, which is simply this. Make a list of the 5 people you care the most about in your life. People that appreciate you, people that you really pour into, people that really pour into your mom, your brother, your nephews, or nieces. When was the last time you sent them a video message? 20-second message. Hey, Yahavi, just want to say I'm thinking about you, brother. I love your podcast. Great show. Keep it up. And the answer for most of us listening to this show, brother, is 0. So if you spend 20 seconds per video, just send a quick video. Hey, I'm thinking about you. You can make all the mistakes in the book. You'll realize that the replies will shock you. Oh my God, Yahavi, wow. You really made my day. Thanks for taking that time. And then you can make a decision of whether or not to do video for real on social.
Man, I gotta I gotta write that one down. I gotta try that one for real. I gotta send my mama a video. Um, that kind of like leads into my next question was, how does one become the world's best communicator, and how do you master that, and what does that look like? But you kind of like touched on a couple of things. Is there anything else you would add on top of that?
100%, brother. So here's the way I think about this. Because to your point, right? That's why I like what you said there, right there. Because it comes back to an earlier question you asked me. How do you become a good podcast guest? Exactly what you just did. So you said in reply to my video message idea, you said, "Hey, I never thought about that. I should send that to my mama after this." So that's a reminder in my mind that I just stored without telling you directly. That okay, it makes sense. He revalidated that idea that I'm sharing a unique thing. I need to keep repeating that message again and again and again. So even as I'm being interviewed, I'm interviewing you too. Because I'm thinking about in my mind what's actually resonating with this guy. Because he's a communication expert. His whole show's about communication. We had Grant and then me. So I need to make sure I'm better than Grant. I need to make sure I'm better than everyone. And I'm just saying this direct. I normally wouldn't say that on a podcast live, but I'm saying that because it ties into the question you asked earlier. And I'm always split testing. Why does Yahavi care about my message? Why does he want to have me on? How do I make sure that every time I answer his bloody question, that I knock it out? I don't just punt the ball. I home run that shit every time. And that's what takes time to get right. So with that said, do you mind repeating the question? I'm happy to answer.
No, my question was, because you touched on a couple of points. Is there anything else you would add to someone being the best communicator they could potentially be?
Absolutely. Thanks, brother. So communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one of those balls is eye contact, one of those balls is smiling, one of those balls is vocal tone variety, and the list goes on. So now the question becomes, how do we work our way towards a world-class communication? The worst thing you want to do is try and pick up all 18 balls at the same time. Like a lot of coaches come on shows and they go like work on storytelling. And my response is like, what does that even mean? Like watch Disney movies all day? You can't just work on storytelling if you haven't removed your ums and ahs. Like if your stories sound like this, hi everyone, so once upon a time, like there's clearly something wrong here. You need to work on your foundations. So now the question becomes, what are the 3 easiest things that people can practice every day to work on their communication skills to get into that top 1% category? I call them my easy 3s. And they're so easy that nobody does them. So if you do it, you'll have a huge competitive advantage. So the first one we already talked about, which is video messages every day. Just send 3 video messages. And if you're a business owner listening to this, I guarantee you it's free money. I'll literally tell you how I make money outside of like podcasts and stuff. I sent video messages to 50 of my active clients. No sell, no pitch. Hey, just thinking about you. Hope you're on a wonderful day. It makes their day. 5 of those 50 people go, oh, Brenden, I'm glad you sent me this video message. I was just thinking about you. My friend was actually interested in joining your program. Do you mind? Boom, I make 10 grand a day. Like, that's it. It's free money. For some reason, Yahavi, business owners don't like free money. I don't understand. They're like going on social media, they're running around, they're calling, cold calling. I was like, what about the clients you already have? When was the last time you sent them a video message? And I'm often the only coach or service provider in my clients' network who's sending them video message. So I get all the money. Great. Give me all the money. I'll take it. So yeah, take that advantage. Send it to people you love. Work that muscle over time. You don't need to post on social. That's number one. Number two is the random. Oh, you want to jump in? Jump in, and then I'll come with the other two.
Nah, that was a very like, yo, I want to say, get out of my head, man, because that led to my next question I was going to ask you. But I want you to finish your point because I'm like, yo, how the hell did you know what I was thinking just now? That's crazy. Go ahead.
But
Go
but
ahead.
that's the thing, man. It's extreme empathy, right? Like I'll give an example. One of my clients asked me the other day. He was like, "Brenden, in that keynote you gave to us 2 months ago, why didn't you talk about how what drove you to MasterTalk?" It's like, why didn't you include that story? And I said, I'll tell you exactly why I didn't include that story because the story isn't relatable. Basically, I did these case competitions. I became a nut job, presented 400 times, worked my tail off, got really good at communication, and then I started Master Talk. But that story sucks. And I'll tell you why. Because my client right now sitting there is thinking this: oh my God, communication is so much work. I can never do this. So notice I'm literally reading the mind of the person who's sitting there. And that requires a lot of empathy. That requires a willingness to kill your ego at the door, sit down and ask them the questions. Ask other people what they care about. Like even with the success I have today, which I still don't think is a lot, though I'm very flattered and humbled by the treatment you're giving me, though, Yahavi. I always say like I'm ground zero. What can I learn from this guy? What's something he can teach me? I always have that mentality, and that's why I'm always able to differentiate myself. So even when I think I'm able to read your mind, there's still another level I haven't hit yet that I always want to keep striving towards. What about the podcast host who doesn't want to have me on the show? What if that person like hates me? How do I get that person to like me? So it's kind of I'm always kind of leveling up the challenge. So that's the first one. Video messages. Let's tackle the other two. Second one is the random word exercise. All you have to do is pick a random word like phone, like headset, like wall, and create presentations out of thin air. So this sounds childish, which is what most people are thinking. Notice what I did there again? Empathy. You just say what they're thinking. But the reason this makes sense is the following. If you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. And that's the magic of the random word exercise. Is if you practice every day with your nieces, your nephews, you can make it a family thing. Over time, you'll get really good. And then finally, exercise number 3, the question drill. We get to ask questions all the time in our life, Yahavi. So every day, we talked about this one earlier. If you spend every day thinking about the answer to a question you think the world will ask you, and you do that for a year, 5 minutes a day, one question, every day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your business, about your life, about your career. No one's going to beat you in your industry.
Wow, that was great. So, man, okay. So I have two questions, and there was one that literally just came up, and I'm like, I gotta ask you this. So, you know the saying, a good listener is a good speaker. What are some listening tips and suggestions, and how does that tie into being a good communicator? For me as a podcast host, I have to be present, right? You can't just be dropping gems like that and I'm mentally in space, right? So, what are some tips and suggestions to being a good communicator? Because my thing is this, and I'll let you go from here. It's kind of like getting on that discovery call where a potential client tells you their problems and you towards then kind of like reiterates it, but you put it on a gold platter, then you reserve it to them. What is your take on listening, active listening? Because there's definitely a difference between listening and hearing. And how does that tie to communication? And how can you use that to drive business? I know that's two questions in a question, but that, yeah, you
You're
got
all
it.
good, man. I'm easygoing. I just go with the flow, and I love your energy. This is great, man. So absolutely. This is actually another example to the first question once again. How do I differentiate myself from other podcast hosts? So I know in my mind right now that most people, because I've listened to all the other experts, usually when they get the listening question, they always respond like this. Listening's really important. Epictetus always says that we have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. You got to listen twice as much as you speak, and it's important. So whenever I listen to that insight, I go, okay, that's good, but how do I beat them? How do I beat the other experts? How do I create a better insight? So now I'm going to tell you what the answer is. So let's reset again. It's a great point on listening, Yahavi. So here's my perspective. We all tell each other that listening is important, but we don't really go into the practicality of how to listen more effectively. So here's the answer. And you'll notice that the answer itself, I'm kind of like playing a meta podcast with you, where I'm kind of explaining why the answer is unique, and I'm also giving you the answer. So the point is, we need to simply look at the percentage of the questions versus the statements that we communicate on a day-to-day basis with the people around us. So I'll give you an example. Most communication generally sounds something like this: statement, 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 statement. So it's a ping-ponging of statements like so. I believe this. Well, I believe this. Well, I believe this. Well, I believe this. So most people communicate this way. 95% of our day-to-day conversations outside of, let's say, a podcast is really just statements. Honey, can you do this? Okay, could you do that? Whereas the best communicators, the best listeners on the planet, Yahavi, their percentage, the ratio of questions is significantly higher than most people. So I'll give you an example. Somebody goes, I believe this. They usually respond with, why do you believe this? Why is that important to you? What is it about that fascinates you about this? What else is important that I should have asked you that I didn't about your own opinion? So they replace a lot of their statements with questions. And especially in the context of the one that you gave us, which is discovery calls, when you start to do that, you're going to be seen as the expert because you understand that person's problems a lot better than other people. And I got this from another coach, and I'm going to butcher the quote a little bit, but essentially is, if you as the coach or you as the service provider understand the problem that you're solving for that specific call, for that specific client, better than anyone else or any other calls that that person is on, the prospect will believe that you are the most likely to have a solution for that problem. So I'll give you an example. If I'm talking to an executive and they're talking about their pain, they're usually Indian born executives or immigrants or people's second language is English. I don't just go, I have the solution for you. Here's my product. No, I say, okay, thanks for sharing your story with me. This is what I'm getting at. This is what I'm hearing. You spent 7 years of your career getting to this part, and then you blocked because of X, Y, and Z, and that's preventing you from getting to that next role. And that's happened with 90% of the people I've worked with. Is that correct? So the person goes, yeah, that's correct. It's almost as if you already knew me before this call. So when you get them to say things like that, they immediately want to go, yeah, yeah. So what do you have? Because it probably solves what I'm looking for. So yeah, that's the bottom line. Ask more questions.
Man, this is really good. This is really good.
So that's good feedback for me too. So I know it's working.
I tell you what, one thing I'll definitely say, I could say this on record. I will never ignore a podcast request ever again. I feel like I've seen your request not on the particular platform where we initially met, but I've seen you on like Instagram. I told you on Clubhouse. Never judge a book by its cover. Never. I'm hearing you speak. Hearing you speak is one thing, right? Like seeing your social media, see social media, people say they do this, they do that. But I could also tell when someone's like trying to pull wool over my eyes. Dude, the way you are just like, you're like slicing these questions up. Like that is literally master talk. So I want to ask you this. What are some challenges? Because you said it in a joking way. Oh, this guy doesn't like me. He didn't want me on my podcast. Not referring to me, but you said,
No, not all.
I know, I know, I know, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But what are some challenges that you're faced with in your particular industry? Are there any common challenges when it comes to, like doing what you're doing? Obviously, I see that you're successful, you're killing it. But what are some hurdles and some challenges that come up, and how do you overcome that?
100%. So let's start with the baseline ones that I had at the beginning. A lot of people don't know this about me, Javi. So I had three big challenges when I was younger that actually made me a shitty communicator. So the first one, I was born and raised in Montreal. So for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak French.
I knew that was a Canadian accent. I'm sorry, I knew it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Even your last name looks a little bit from Montreal too. So kind of like, is this guy French?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So the French. So I presented my whole life in a language I didn't know, Yahavi. That's the first block because I needed to know how to speak French. So I went to French school my whole life. Number two is I actually have a crooked left arm, right? You don't see that on Clubhouse or on my socials, but it's the way that I communicate. So whenever I'm keynoting, I'm in a workshop, you see that my left arm is crooked because of a surgery I had when I was 2. So I had this big cast when I was in kindergarten, in first grade, really tough for me to make friends. And I had a lot of social anxiety. So that's number two. And then number three, you would think that I would study in communications as a communication coach, but I have a bachelor's degree in accounting. So I had so many strikes against me. Why in the world would I be a great communicator? The other piece was when I started the company. I mean, it wasn't really a company back then. It was just a YouTube channel. I was fairly young. I mean, I'm still young today, but when I started, I mean, I was 22 at the time. My nearest competitor at the time, he's my colleague now. Alex Lyon is someone I look up to a lot on YouTube. He has like 300,000 subscribers or something in communication, but he has a PhD in the topic. Really nice guy, by the way. But he has a PhD in comms, and he's like 50. And I was like years old. So I said, okay, am I really going to be able to make better videos than this guy? So I definitely had a lot of uncertainty around that as well. And then the third piece was definitely ageism, right? Around like a lot of executives just didn't trust me because I was young. So I needed to be 10 times smarter than the next guy. I really needed to refine myself. Like when I started guessing on podcasts, I mean, yeah, I'm good now, but people need to hear this. I've been on 500 podcasts. Like this is reps, right? This is not like what I remember I got asked the question once, hey, where does the fear of communication come from? I was like, I don't know, San Diego, Los Angeles, you tell me, man. I don't know. And then over time, like even that joke I just told you, Javi, was timed. Like I know you're gonna laugh at that joke because I know it's funny, so I keep using it again. But that's the point, brother. Like you just gotta drill, drill, drill. Like me, I have such an obsession. Like for me, it's like the listening question. I know when that question drops because I've been asked it like 90 times at this point. I know exactly what I'm going to say. I know exactly what I'm going to say when you ask me about imposter syndrome or around like the 3 easiest things that people can do or this, but not because I'm smart, but because I have just repped so much more. Like a good way of understanding this, and I'll throw it back to you, is I've learned 40 years of communication in 4 years. Like I've literally repped so many times. I'm like on 20 podcasts a week. Like it's nuts. I've repped so many times that the next person in my industry just can't compete with me.
Dude said, "This is reps," and flexed. I'm like, oh, yo,
No, but for
yo.
real, like that's just the truth. I spend all day in my mother's basement. I just do shows because I want to be the best in the world. That's like my goal, not for like a selfish thing. Oh, I'm gonna make. I do well financially. It's not about the money, man. It's about how do we live in a world where the next Elon Musk, who's a 15-year-old girl who can't afford a communication coach, what are we doing for her? Because when Elon Musk was 15 years old, nobody gave a shit about him. Nobody was helping him. And I said, shit, like if we're helping singers become pop stars and we're discovering them, what are we doing for the next technology CEOs and change makers and scientists? Is nobody going to give them free communication content? And everyone in my industry, honestly, is selfish. They're not sharing this stuff for free. And I was like, okay, well, I already made my money. Because I'm sure I got a lot more to go to make, but I might as well help people along the way. So yeah, I just have that mission that I feel a lot of people in my industry don't have.
Dude said reps. Yo, man, kudos to you, man. Like, man, I'm like in awe because look, when you hear a good communicator, when you listen to like a really good speaker, like they pull you in. Like, you know what I mean? Like you pulled me in. So I'm like in this warp, but I also need to finish this interview. But that just goes to show you're a really good storyteller. So can you talk about, man, this is really good. I'm excited for my listeners to hear this one. Can you talk about the kind of like the power of storytelling in a way, and like how you tied that into communication? I've heard this quote before. No one cares about your brand until they know your story, right? And you already touched on storytelling without even touching on storytelling. So can you kind of like throw that in, even though you kind of like touched on it already?
Yeah, of course, brother. Happy to. So the first thing I'll say is, so let me throw some tough love as well. Is it goes back to the easy threes, right? The random word exercise, the question drills, and the video messages. But here's the problem, Yohavi. A lot of people like taking notes on all the strategies we're sharing, but they're not going to get better if they don't implement. So 1% of the people listening to this right now have already booked 15 minutes a day to do the random word exercise a few times. It takes like 3 5 minutes to do question drill, few minutes, to do video messages, a few minutes. And those are the people that win. And this is what I always like to say. The best way to speak, oddly enough, weirdly enough, coincidentally enough, is to speak. I know it's like mind blowing, but it's just the truth. Like you can't just listen to me all day or you. You got to actually put in the time. You got to like rep 15 minutes a day, book it in your calendar, and actually do the random word exercise. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're an accountant listening to this, right? Just ask yourself, think about your industry, because it's not versus the world, it's versus the people you're competing against in your field. So if you're a technology executive listening to this, don't compare yourself to Tony Robbins. That's not a fair comparison. Think about the other technology executives in your field. It's at Salesforce. So if you think about it, here's a question I want us to think about. Then let's jump into storytelling. Is what percentage of your industry are willing to do the random word exercise 10 times in their life? In their life, Yahavi, not like 10 times a day, like 10 times period for the rest of their life. The answer is probably 5%, maybe 3%. We're already getting really low here. What if I said 100 times? How many people are willing to do the random word exercise 100 times in their life? It doesn't even have to be done correctly. Just 100 times, period. In tech, especially, the answer is already less than 1%. What if I said 200 times? Then the answer gets really, really small. Nobody's willing to rep 200 times. But here's the thing. The answer is one person in the industry is willing to do that. And you better make sure that that person is you. So think about this. Am I asking for 200 minutes out of somebody's day? No, that's like 3 hours. Am I asking for 200 minutes out of somebody's month? Nope. Out of their year? No. Can you give me 200 minutes out of your life? That's the point I want us to understand. Are you willing to send 100 video messages that nobody else is willing to send? Because if you're not willing to do that, there's no way you're going to master storytelling, because storytelling is way harder than all of those other things that we can jump into. But that's really the point I want to drive, is that we got to start with those reps. You can literally stop listening to this podcast now and just do those reps and then come back, and you would be better than 99% of people who are listening to this podcast right now.
Man, that's some good stuff. Man, that was good.
Yeah. So now we can jump into storytelling if you want.
Yes, please, man. I'm like, told you, like, I'm in that portal now. Like,
dude, I appreciate it. At least
get reps. Once this is done, I'm getting reps, bro. Like, you said 500 podcasts. That's amazing. I love to hear it.
Dude, man, it's important, because that's what I always tell people want to build a personal brand. I don't rely on the algorithm or people to say, yeah, sure, my count on YouTube is good. I'm not going to hide it or anything. But the way I think about it is not 10,000 followers or 10,000 people following me. That's not what this is. It's 10,000 conversations. Like for me, when I started MasterTalk, I told myself, heck, if nobody is listening to this podcast right now, and I talk to 10,000 Yahavis, and they're the only person that's listening to me. Let's say there's nobody else. Like there's not even your mom. Like nobody's listening. Let's assume. I have 10,000 subscribers. I don't need no algorithm. If I go on 10,000 podcasts and it's literally just me shouting at somebody else for 30 minutes and there's nobody else listening, and it's just that one person, I know after 10,000 conversations, people know about me regardless, right? So, and that's the mindset we need to have. We need to realize that 10,000 followers means 10,000 people. So even when I'm bigger, and I still have a lot more to go, I'm just getting this party started. But even when I'm bigger, if smaller shows reach out to me, if I have the time, I'll still make the time. Because these conversations are so important, because it keeps me close to the audience. Because that's who we're serving at the end of the day. They're the people who are the source of truth. They're the people who determine who wins and who loses. Sports is different. Sports is not about the fans. I'll be honest. It's about your individual skill, your team's skill set, and that's how you win that game. Whether the people are sitting in the stadium or not doesn't affect your performance on the court. It might affect it a little bit. But in personal branding, in media, in growing a following, yeah, the number of people who follow you, the people who listen to you, that's the scoreboard. So you got to make sure that you're serving them, you treat them like VIP, even if they never become your client. That's really the mindset. Which jumps into, jump in. Yeah, go ahead.
Nah, go ahead, man. I just want to just jump in and say, man, this is good. Nah, you're good, man. You're good. Go ahead.
At least you're a reassurance that I'm doing something right with my life. I appreciate the support. So now let's jump into storytelling. So now with all of that said, you've done the random word exercise, you've done the question drills, you've done the reps necessary. Trust me, let's start with the good news, because I think I've been a little bit doomsday today. Is if you do those 3 exercises, you would have done something that none of my executive clients do. None of them. I have to push them all the time to do those 3 things. That's why they pay me. But literally, if you just do them, you're beating most people in your industry. especially if you're in something like manufacturing. My God, like nobody knows what a question drill is in manufacturing, right? So if you're doing those things in an industry that's not hot, my God, you're crushing your industry. You're going to stand out so much more. So think about that. So in the context of storytelling, how do we elevate this more? Storytelling is all about. Oh, you want to jump in? Go ahead, bro.
Yes, yo, you just freaking opened this door in my mind just now. When you said, man, question prep, right? Same thing like job interviews, man. If you're getting ready for that big tech job interview, what are some questions that they may potentially ask you? Man, yo, dude, like I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. Go
No,
go
I
ahead.
love
I'm
this.
like, I'm like, ah, man.
I love this, man. It's a reassurance that I finally nailed this.
Yeah.
So the point is, and it took me 500 bloody podcasts to get it right. So the point is that you just said that was so key. It actually ties into something I've always done. Even when I was in university and I was looking for a job, a lot of people ask me all the time, like, okay, what's the secret? My answer is always play team. Like I apply with people who want the same job as me, and we work together. Which sounds counterintuitive because you're like, wait, Brenden, you're competing against them. You're not competing against them because if you're on the same team as them and you're helping each other late at night, you're preparing questions with each other, you're doing the question drills, you're prepping, us four together are better than any candidate in the market. Like anyone who's prepping alone doesn't stand a chance against all four of us together. And that's why all of us got job offers. And let's say I wasn't the guy who got the job offer. Let's say everyone else got jobs and I didn't. They prepped every question. Every question was written out. That's how I prepped for IBM. I knew exactly what to say. Tell me about yourself. I knew exactly what to say for why should we pick you, blah, blah, blah. Let's say I didn't get picked. Doesn't matter. I still get the job. Why? Because the other three people who got jobs, who are they going to refer? What, are they going to refer some hillbilly on the street? Or are they going to refer the person who stood up all night with them, practicing for free, helping them? Like, people don't get that if you help other people, and if you help the right people, the generous people, the people who pour into, like in the way you're pouring into me, you're very gracious, you're very kind. If you do that, you bring your best self. I mean, that's where the dividends are. That's where the real magic is. And people just don't get that.
Man, look. Whew. When I brought up, man, that was a very good point about the referencing someone if they get the opportunity and you don't. But when you mentioned like that's how I got that opportunity at IBM, like and you're big on LinkedIn as well. So when people don't hear back from employers, I'm just assuming, they just don't get the opportunity, they weren't prepped and ready. But what you touched on in this particular podcast interview, this also this also ties to the people that are looking for that career opportunity. That is just it's kind of like game changing, kind of like I I don't know, I'm kind of like lost for words. It's kind of funny we're talking about communication, but I'm lost for words. Kind of stuck at the point where it's like I never looked at it like that before. The preparation for interviews, kind of like very similar to the podcast. And this is just my take. Job interviews and podcast interviews, somewhat similar if it's questions and kind of like prepping. Like for your interview, I'll be honest, I didn't prep. Like I'm like, you know what? I don't like sounding like a robot or redundant. I just go with the flow of conversation. For me, this was more so a conversation than an interview because like there is just I mean, I'm pretty sure you could touch this, right? There's just some people that it when you talk to them, it's just a conversation, doesn't feel like an interview. So you have this confidence when you go into podcast interviews because you've done this 500 times. So when you get prepped for these big tech opportunities, you've done this before. You've prepped for interviews before. And also, I've seen this in a training I've done a while back for this for a SDR role. It was like some sales training boot camp and they get you a tech opportunity or something like that. And they go over interview prep on the tell me about yourself. And I want to talk to you about this mainly because of communication and storytelling. They told me whenever it's a tell me about yourself, it's usually tell me a little bit about yourself and how yourself relates to the position that you're applying to. So I want you to kind of like touch on that because we get hit with that question a lot in interviews. And a lot of people, well, in fourth grade, I was the best, spelling bee champ. And, you know what I mean? So how do you avoid doing that?
Absolutely. I mean, let's start with level one on this. Level one on this is people don't write out their answer for tell me about yourself, which I think is a stupid, stupid thing to do. And the reason is super simple because I was a recruiter for IBM after I got the job. And I was expecting people to interview like me. I thought everyone was prepping like me, doing question drills and all that stuff. We need to remember that tell me about yourself, Yahavi, is the most important question in the interview because it dictates the pace for everything else. So when I started doing those interviews, when I was the recruiter, not the candidate, I was working there, and I would ask people, "Tell me about yourself." So, like, tell me a little bit about you and your experience. They would always reply with, "Oh, so I worked at," and I'm just like, "Geez, I can't put this person in front of a client. They already lost. Even if they knock out every question, they hit a home run. I'm super uncomfortable hiring them because I can't see them in front of one of our clients at the company. It just doesn't make sense. Versus if somebody goes in, they don't have to be cheesy, but if they go, "Hi, my name's Brenden. If there's one thing that you remember from today's interview," like this guy sounds confident or gal sounds confident. You go, "Okay, I don't know if this guy's the right candidate, but he can definitely talk in front of clients. I'm comfortable." That's the first check. Even if it's not a client facing role, you're always facing people, employees, stakeholders. And if you want to senior level roles, you're taking higher risk. So it's important that you're able to do that. So what's my 5-step framework on tell me about yourself? Very simple. Number one, state your name and one main theme about yourself. So my go-to line was always this when I was looking for a job, I guess centuries ago, I guess. Mine was, "My name is Brenden Kumarasamy. If there's one thing that you remember from this interview, as I help others achieve rocket ship level success." That was my go-to sentence. That's the first thing. So you could employ my passion is helping other people. My passion is technology. Insert whatever your passion is there. So there's 5 steps. That's 1. 2, 3, and 4 is simply the top 3 skills that you believe the perfect candidate would have for this role and how each of your CV experiences relate to that. So I'll give you an example. For me, in consulting, it was being able to face with clients, being a strong leader, and ability to help others, let's just say. So I would say something like, I led a team of 20 people in university, helping them, coaching them through communication, public speaking. I helped Scott Harrison, the CEO of Charity Water, sell his book so that we can bring more awareness to the water crisis. I'm philanthropic. And the third piece is client-facing roles. I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers in the sustainability department where I faced a lot of CFOs, a lot of C-level executives to go through their missions. That's the last piece. So you got to tie in the top 3 qualities that specific role is looking for and tie it to one quick experience on your CV. And the last part that everyone gets wrong, and the last part is, why are you online? Like, why are you on air? Why are you here? So the last piece is going, and this is why I believe IBM is the next step in my career because of X, Y, and Z. And that's how you close it. Tell me about yourself. So when you close with that format, people look at you and they go, "Okay, this person is serious." And then the human mind, this is called confirmation bias, they start to create stories as to why you should get the job. Versus if you screw up that question, confirmation bias work in the opposite way. They'll start to make up stories as to why I shouldn't give you the job. And that's a big piece of this.
That is a perfect soundbite for LinkedIn right there. Oh my gosh. Yo, you nailed that one right in the head. I know we're summing up towards the end of this interview, unfortunately. Like, time flies by when you're having fun.
It's
Like,
great.
legit flies by. There was so, and that last one was such a gem, but there was so much gems in this interview, literally from start to finish. What would you say is the takeaway message you want the listeners and everyone either listening or watching this? What do you want them to take away from the conversation that was had today?
Yeah, for sure, man. I don't say this often, but I'll say it on this one. Here's my go-to. For those of you who have listened to 49 minutes of this podcast, you're clearly someone who's serious. You want to develop yourself, you want to grow. So here's the advice: be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you want to do something important with your life, you want to stand out from the pack, you need to realize that the only way to do that, the only way to do crazy things in life is to be a crazy person. Don't you find it odd, Yahavi, that I started a YouTube channel not on pranks, not on skits, not on comedy, but on public speaking and executive communication tips at the age of 22 in my mother's basement, yet 4 years later, I still live in my mother's basement, even if I coach a lot of these CEOs. I love Justin Bieber. I'm in the 0.5% of top listeners on Spotify for the guy. I own a car, but I'm too scared to drive it, and I can karaoke in 8 different languages. How does any of this make any sense at all? And that, my friend, is the point. When every decision in your life makes sense to the only person that it should, which is you, you'll probably be successful in life. So be insane or be the same would be my final thought.
That is a gem right there. Where can we follow you, keep up, and subscribe to your social media, all of your content? Please
Yeah,
shout it out.
absolutely, man. It's great. It was great to be on. Thanks for having me, man. So, two easy ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. All you got to do is type MasterTalk in one word, and you'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to communicate ideas effectively. And then the second way to keep in touch, for those of you who are interested in seeing me live on a Zoom call, I do a free training over Zoom every 3 weeks or so. It's live, it's interactive, it's fun. So if you want to register for that, it's rockstarcommunicator.com to register for our next free training.
This was
Oh, you
really
muted,
good.
brother.
No, this was really good. Whew. Again, I want to thank you for spending your time with me today, man. Man, this was so good, man. I'm like, damn, it's done already. Whew. Okay. All right. Let me close out. Got to get in closeout mode. All right. So, like always, what good is information if we don't apply it? There was so much gems. If you need to pause this episode, rewind, if take notes, Brenden said something that just spot on, right? Like none of the if you listen to what we're 51 minutes in, if you listen to this entire point and you don't implement anything, you just wasted 51 minutes because you're never going to implement it. Yeah, you got the information, but what good is it if we're not applying it? We're not taking action. What do you say? Stay. What is it? Stay. That's
Be
say this.
insane. Be insane or be the same.
I'll end it on that note. Like always, I'll catch you in the next episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the St. Clair Speak Show podcast. I'll catch you in the next episode. I'm out. Peace.